Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Leaked internal messages from Mercedes supposedly indicate that the team is pretty much entirely on board with the idea of bringing Max Verstappen into their team next year to replace Lewis Hamilton. Whether Toto Wolff is capable of getting this job done is another question entirely, and also raises serious questions as to whether George Russell is really a leadership candidate, especially after his crash in Melbourne last weekend. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, McLaren, they have a brand new livery. Well, okay, brand new. It's pretty similar to what they usually run for the Japanese Grand Prix this weekend. Japanese inspired in some ways. I'll just share a couple of pictures here. I think it looks kind of nice, designed by a Japanese artist. The numbers as well are not usual lettering. They're more kind of like Japanese-esque designs, and this is kind of cool from this angle. So there you go, new livery this weekend. Nothing we think for Red Bull. They have been teasing a lot every year they do this about the return of the white Bull or whatever, the white livery on the Red Bull from a few years ago. It doesn't look like it's going to be happening again. They've been teasing it though, because here they go on social medias. Maybe it'll return one day. This is just yesterday. They even did another kind of tweet here out on the Red Bull Moto, like their Japanese accounts, saying a similar thing. Grateful the Japanese Grand Prix is being held again this year. So they're teasing this whole white livery thing. But it's probably not going to happen, because there was a picture here spotted from the paddock, which is seemingly Verstappen's car behind closed doors, and we can see that it ain't white, is it, right? It's just the normal colour that it usually is. And even Verstappen said, regarding the upgrades, I think we saw this question posed to him yesterday, and he said the colour will be the same, but apart from that, we'll see. So the implication was that they will make some visual changes to their car, but of course the livery is going to be the same. Maybe if the livery was going to be different, you can read into that actually no, Max was being sarcastic and there are no visual changes to the car, maybe changes to the floor or something, as we rumoured yesterday. But the livery would be different. But apparently that ain't the case, because the car looks the same as it normally does to me. So probably we will see some degree of visual upgrades on the car, maybe on the side pods. Probably many of their changes are on the floor. That's the rumour for the Red Bull major upgrade this weekend. They're not calling it major, but other teams, Mercedes, even Alpine, Aston Martin, Ferrari, are bringing rather minor changes this weekend. It seems of all the teams, if anyone's bringing a more significant change, that is the Red Bull, but I imagine we won't be able to see that much of it, right? If it is a floor upgrade, we're not going to see it unless somebody bins it in the wall, which of course is possible, and we've had that happen for sure last season, but not necessarily around here. Speaking of Red Bull, Christian Horner again finds himself in the spotlight here. I do find it interesting, the timing, that like every single race weekends, as soon as the race weekend's about to happen, bang, there's some sort of story that drops that is, talking about the Horner case, which he's probably going to have to comment on, possibly in the interviews, I don't really know. But a family friend of the complainant says that she is upset, scared and lonely over this whole situation. So, it's obviously not been handled well from a transparency perspective. And that's even what Seb Vettel says. He was talking to the media today about various things, about even a potential Mercedes return, we'll discuss in a second, and pretty much saying like, the situation isn't good from a transparency angle. Red Bull should probably have said more, and maybe should say more, but they probably won't. And it feels like now, if any time over the last few weeks that Horner's position has been the safest it's been, now seems to be pretty consolidated, that Horner ain't going anywhere. What that means for the internal stability of that team, given the fact that Jos Verstappen said that if Horner stays, the team is going to explode, that's another question, and that is a question that Toto Wolff will look to take advantage of. But if he doesn't get Verstappen, if Antonelli isn't ready, if the other options have better offers, or he can't really get the drivers that he wants, then there has been talk about Vettel to Mercedes. We discussed this the other day, that there was conversations being had between Vettel and Toto Wolff. He addressed the discussion and actually said that for now, staying retired is, Vettel's kids like it, and that makes sense. But he also says that doing Le Mans this year is probably not going to be happening, but he did open the door to say, look, if I was given the right car, then a discussion would be worthwhile. And it's very difficult to keep these Formula 1 champions and just racers at heart away from racing for too long. And I feel like there is a chance that Vettel returns, but I think it would have to be in a very promising position, and on the current Mercedes trajectory, it's tough to imagine they can actually give Vettel what he would require to make a return to the sport, in the same way that Max Verstappen, you would think, would want a bit more from Mercedes than they are currently showing. It's also said from Chris Medland, and it has been a theory in the media over the last couple of days, that Antonelli is the favourite for Mercedes. That is the dream scenario. I think the dream scenario probably is to get Max, let's be real. Like, however good Antonelli may be and prove to be in Formula 2 this season, if Max is available, Russell, you obviously take him, right? And this is what apparently Mercedes are saying to each other internally. But the feeling from Chris Medland and other journalists is that realistically, you consider Alonso, Sainz, and outside of that, you probably have Albon and possibly Ocon slightly further down the list. But among those drivers, Antonelli is the one that Mercedes really want to put in the car. And this is why Carlos Sainz, I feel like, would be hesitant to join Mercedes, is because he probably knows he's a bit of a stopgap, unless he has the confidence, as I'm sure Fernando Alonso would have the confidence, to come into Mercedes and say, actually, you know what, sure, maybe you do want to bring Antonelli in a year or two, but you're going to bring him in for George Russell and not for myself, right? And maybe Carlos Sainz would think that, but who knows? If he goes to Mercedes, outperforms Russell, which I'm sure he'd be confident that he could do, then Antonelli would replace Russell rather than replacing the incoming driver in that particular scenario. But I think the ideal word for Mercedes is that Antonelli is so good, this, protege level talent, and there's debate as to whether Antonelli is being thrown into the deep end too early, whether all of this attention is going to backfire on Antonelli, and maybe there's an argument to say yes. But if he's a driver truly capable of what Mercedes think he's capable of doing, then I don't think that will matter, and it's not like Verstappen getting thrown into the absolute deepest of all deep ends when he first came into the sport. Sure, he was very raw in the early days, but it's not like it's affected Verstappen's career in terms of the driver he became and the championships that he has now won. So reportedly, Antonelli is the man. But if Verstappen's available, you don't say no to that, right? And this is the big discussion right now about what Red Bull are actually doing. And this is also the reason why Red Bull are really considering drivers that aren't Yuki or Daniel Ricciardo for promotion. They are looking at the same drivers I just mentioned. Certainly, Fernando Alonso is the rumour that Christian Horner is very keen to bring him into the team potentially. And then for sure, Carlos Sainz. The debate has always been, would you put those drivers alongside Max? Would that create good internal team dynamics? Well, Christian Horner might want to show Verstappen who's boss and show the Verstappens who's boss and say, look, I do what I want around here. Like, I make the decisions and, you have no say anymore. That is the way the power dynamics here are going to play. So you will get along, or you won't necessarily get along, but you will be forced to cooperate with Sainz Sr., despite not particularly liking him, Mr. Jos Verstappen, because that's how I want to run my team, and it is my team. Might be the way that Christian Horner is presently thinking, but it does seem like, despite I think Yuki is a very good driver, I think they're looking for potentially even better options or just more ideal options as a second driver to Max. Those are other questions. But of course, if Max was to go, then all of a sudden, it makes sense, a lot of sense, to target a very strong driver, because if Max was to leave, then all of a sudden you've got a good backup plan, such as an Alonso or even a Sainz or something, to still potentially win you the championship in next year's Red Bull if Max was to depart. And maybe there's something in the fact that Toto has actually cancelled all his plans to not attend. It was very well known that Toto wasn't going to be in Japan. They said that themselves. But now Toto has changed his mind. He is going to be there at Suzuka this weekend. Whether you feel like this is like a crisis management perspective, where the team's in such a shambles that Toto wants to oversee operations himself and see how things are getting along, which might make sense, or whether you think that, maybe he's expecting to have some conversations this weekend that he might not have otherwise necessarily had. Bottas, by the way, I don't expect he's going to be in the conversations to coming back to either of those two teams, certainly Mercedes, right? Slowly getting the ball rolling, though, he says, on his Audi future, currently with Sauber. Their car actually isn't that bad. On pure pace, their car's okay. It's maybe even respectable, but it's just every Grand Prix so far, they've had at least one shocking pit stop that has ruined their Grand Prix, and they say that in order to fix those issues, they've got to bring new pit stop hardware that's going to take another few rounds to come. So it ain't looking good for them in the immediate term, and Bottas will try and get the Audi seat, I imagine, but it makes a lot of sense for them to bring in Hülkenberg +1 when that is a thing over the next couple of years. But Lewis Hamilton is leaving Mercedes, of course, at the end of the season. I don't imagine he's regretting his decision at all, given the current state of the team. This I thought was also kind of interesting. I mentioned the other day the GQ interview that Hamilton did, and he discussed the Top Gun Maverick role that he was offered, and he eventually had to turn it down because of the timing of when it was going to be recorded, and he also was like, well, I hadn't even had an acting lesson, so I didn't want to be the one to let the movie down and all this. And it turns out Danny Ramirez, who played Fanboy in the film, that was actually meant to be Lewis Hamilton's role in the film if it happens. Who was this guy, if you guys have seen the film? So I just thought I'd share this because it's kind of remarkable, and they have a bit of a back and forth here, and as Hamilton says, you deserve it, bro, I'm so happy for you. And as Lewis then says, Top Gun 3, I'm in. So if they do decide to do a follow-up again with, Joseph Kosinski and Tom Cruise is still going, because he probably still will be, then Hamilton is there for that one, whatever it takes, it seems. Because I think Hamilton regrets not doing it. It would have been fun, I'm sure, but it did kind of clash with the Formula 1 season. But, you know, Hamilton has made it very clear that after his career, even he said this a couple of days ago, after he's done in Formula 1, that's going to be it, right? Like, he's going to leave that chapter behind him and he's going to go do other cool stuff, such as acting, whatever he wants to do. I don't imagine Lewis will be back in the paddock every weekend after he's done with the sport, but he's done with Mercedes. That very much is clear, and therefore Wolff needs a replacement for him. So Toto actually said this quite explicitly in his statements on this matter, really, and we've heard him be explicit before, but he is really just telling Max, like, please come and join us, Max. We really want you. We really need you, and this is the place to be, apparently, even though the car is terrible. We have one free place, the only one among the top teams, which is true, the top teams being Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari on paper, but yeah, where are Mercedes in this year's Constructors' Championship? It ain't looking so good so far. Unless Max decides to leave, then our place will no longer be free. I am waiting for him. A few months ago, I would never have expected that I could say that. I don't want to speculate too much about his thoughts or put him under pressure. Now he is in the best car and has a very good relationship with Red Bull. It's just that whole working environment is maybe not what it should be at the moment, as we know full well on the rumours around Horner and Marco and Mintzlaff and Verstappen and all this stuff over the last few months. In due course, Max, Jos and Raymond, who's Max's manager, Jos of course being Max's dad, will have to decide what is their priority: the car, the results, or certain values within the team that can be respected or not respected and which they consider important. So interesting that he says this, right? He's like, yeah, sure, choose the car or the results, which the driver is going to have a very hard time saying no to if you have the best car, let's be real. Or certain values. Toto's like, yeah, well, we have good values over here. The car might be terrible, but at least we have good corporate values. However, there is a feeling, and there has been for some time, that Mercedes arguably have the strongest engine project for 2026, in which case maybe Max thinks, well, is it actually the worst idea ever to take it a year out, as it were, in 2025 and drive a Mercedes, but then be in the best possible position in 2026 if Mercedes nail the new regulations, which is possible. But if I'm Max, I'm not seeing that much confidence that's the case. Their engine might be a rocket, but if it is, then maybe even McLaren looks like the way to go because they're a Mercedes customer. So that was what was said in the second part of this statement. Mercedes can currently boast by far the best values for the new engines. The group is also offering a long-term lucrative advertising ambassador contract, which is an attraction that is hard to refuse for the Dutchman, especially after his active career could represent, which is another interesting point because let's not forget Toto and Max, they had a relationship back in the day, but Wolff was not able to offer Max the seat at Mercedes because he didn't have a seat on the table. They had Hamilton and Rosberg at the time, whereas Helmut Marko could say, hey, we've got a second team, come and drive for Toro Rosso, and the rest is very much history. But Mercedes would be willing, and this would be quite remarkable, right? After all the years with Hamilton and the incredibly toxic, as it was at the time, rivalry they had with Max Verstappen and Red Bull and Christian Horner during 2021 and even slightly previously, that really boiled over. The idea that Mercedes were not offering Hamilton the ambassadorial contract, right? This is what they were saying, that Hamilton wanted a 2+1 year deal. He wanted some ambassadorial, stakes in the team or whatever to stay on. Hamilton's feeling was that he was going to be a Mercedes man for life. All of a sudden, Ferrari come along and say, hey, Lewis, we'll give you your 2+1. We'll give you the ambassadorial roles. We'll give you whatever you want. Mercedes weren't willing to because apparently they didn't want Hamilton to hold on to the Antonelli seat for too long. And now Mercedes might come along and give that to Max. That is apparently the rumor, right? Which would be quite the turn of events if Max was to somehow become the long-term Mercedes ambassador that Hamilton arguably should and could have been, and then Hamilton now does that for Ferrari. The other piece, though, early on, and okay, this is F1 Insider, so small grain of salt, but very interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised at this. Over 90% of Mercedes employees want Max Verstappen as the new shining symbol of their star. This is clear from the positive comments on the Mercedes intranet. If you guys have worked with big companies, you often have these like weird intranet things run by, Yamaha is one of them. I don't think it'll be that for Mercedes. I imagine it'll be more tightly controlled. But yeah, in addition to the sporting aspect, which we just mentioned on the engine side and all that stuff. So the feeling is that Mercedes wants Max to join. That shouldn't be a massive surprise. But it does maybe paint a bit of a picture about George Russell, right? Because this was said when Hamilton left. George has the potential to be our next lead driver. He is of the generation of Lando and Leclerc and some of the others. But is that being called into question somewhat? Because he's been at the team now. He will have been for 3 years. He's driving very well. I think there's no doubt. And George gets, I think, underrated by people just because people don't like him. I think he's a really, really good driver and would be a challenge, I think, to anyone on the grid. Is he, however, lead driver material? That is another question. For the same reason that it still feels like Hamilton is doing maybe more experimentation on the car at the moment than Russell is. Russell seems a bit more willing just to drive what he's got and try and beat his teammate rather than really help the team take strides forward, maybe compared to some other drivers on the grid. And there's a debate as to, let's say Antonelli was to come in and Russell would be the lead man. Would that really work? Would that be, the best possible situation compared to some of the other driver pairings on the grid? Especially when Russell has been known for having his incidents, right? And this is maybe when the concern raises and why Mercedes internally, right? Because if Mercedes internally, their employees, were super confident that Russell was the man and, Russell's on the same pace as Hamilton now, he's the guy to lead us forward, we probably don't need Max because Russell's there. Clearly, if that's anything to go by, they don't really have that confidence that Russell is the guy. This is him crashing out in Singapore last year. This is him crashing out in Melbourne last week. And sure, was this Alonso's fault? No, there's part of it. I think that Alonso was not in the right, but at the end of the day, Alonso wasn't the one that pushed Russell into the wall. He went off the track himself, which was his mistake, I would say, at the end of the day. And, we talked about that at length previously. There was also, for example, Canada 2023. This is last year when he put it in the wall of entirely his own doing. And many other examples, even Brazil, when he was, it was at 2022, actually, Brazil that he eventually won, but he was off in the gravel earlier in the weekend in qualifying. There's been a fair few incidents for Russell over the last couple of years. He's been crashing into Hamilton in Spain qualifying. He's been almost colliding with Hamilton in qualifying in Spa, whatever it was. There's been quite a few moments like this. And if I was Mercedes internally, would I be thinking, yeah, Russell's the guy? I'm not so sure I would anymore. Especially when they have quite the hole to dig themselves out of, right? Hamilton even said that during Australian, the weekend, let's say, the W15 went from being the best car he's driven in the last 3 years to undrivable between FP3 and qualifying. Between FP3 and qualifying, there was really no change to anything at all but the temperature. And this is the really strange thing for Mercedes. And temperature does affect cars relatively significantly in various ways. But there was apparently no setup changes, no changes at all of any nature apart from the track conditions and the temperature. And that changed the car from being fantastic to being basically useless over the course of those few hours. So it's a big problem they've got to solve. And Toto Wolff says, we've shown signs of strong performance, but we haven't been able to deliver that at critical moments. This weekend is another good challenge and a good opportunity to build on our learnings. This is all they've been doing for the last few years. I think Mercedes is learning and analyse the work that has been undertaken since Australia. And we don't know whether that's actually going to be any good or bad. These are the contenders, though, theoretically this weekend. Mercedes aren't really in the conversation to be having a great performance this weekend. Hamilton, I think, every time he's finished the Japanese Grand Prix, has finished at least in the top 5. So that was the case last year as well, and the year before. I think he finished 5th in both 22 and 23. But, of course, as we full well know, this year that Mercedes in Sector 1 is probably going to be a tractor based on the high-speed performance. So, definitely, the McLaren should be good here. Red Bull have an upgrade, and they've got the best car anyway. Ferrari have a small upgrade, but it's maybe not expected to do all that much. There is talk, though, from Aston Martin. They're making changes as well. Discussions here that they're going to have a new aero package, changes to the floor, new beam wing at the rear of the car, and other bodywork alterations. So, a few key packages these teams are bringing this weekend. Is it going to make that much difference to the champion? One thing that might is rain, because there is still a feeling that on Sunday it may well be rain affected. The percentages change all the time, but it seems like there is at least a chance that we get some intermediate tyres on the cars, because the wet tyres are completely useless. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.